Hi, welcome to the Power 2 Pod. My name's Andy,
And I'm Jason.
and this is going to be our Week 7 review show where we're just going to talk about things that happened in Week 7. We had some big games on the board with Penn State USC, Ohio State Oregon, Ole Miss LSU, and then we also saw, Alabama struggle again and Tennessee struggle again. What stuck out to you, Jay, from Week 7?
It was pretty surprising to see Tennessee struggle against Florida, especially being a home game in Tennessee. Um, like I said, that game ended up going into overtime. It was still low scoring. It's 23-17. And, that's not normal to see with a Josh Heupel offense. And, they were high on Nico early this year, and they're putting up points left and right. Now all of a sudden they're in the thick of the SEC, and now they're lucky to score 3 touchdowns. So I think they're kind of more turning into a pretender than an actual contender as the season progresses.
Yeah, I just pulled up the box score, and Nico is 16 of 26 for 169 yards, no touchdowns, one interception. And that's just not what we're used to seeing from Josh Heupel offenses. There's no explosiveness. You know, they're just not scoring points at will like they usually do. It's just weird because they finally have the defense that they've been missing in those high offensive years, and now they can't score points.
Yeah, exactly. And then another game that was surprising was Ole Miss lost to LSU. Another game that went into overtime. Usually a big shootout team, kind of LSU and Ole Miss have been, high scoring, and, and they ended this game with 26-29, but, Jackson Dart did not look great. He had a really low percentage rating. And Ole Miss had like 110 yards in penalties. And I think that was like the big kind of difference maker in this game because, they kind of both had a couple turnovers, kind of went back and forth. Neither offense played very efficiently. But yeah, the penalties had to kill them, put them behind the sticks a lot. But yeah, it's just, Ole Miss was a huge favorite coming into the year, had a super easy schedule, dropped an early ball against Kentucky. This was one of their tougher games going to LSU. And it went into overtime and just didn't go their way. Like you always say, that's just the Lane Kiffin way. Any game that he's supposed to win, he don't.
Yeah, like it's not any game is supposed to win, but any big game, Lane Kiffin kind of shrivels and really struggles. And I'm coming from Penn State with James Franklin, so I understand not winning big games. But Lane Kiffin, he's getting a reputation now. He's not exactly. I get LSU's a hard place to play at night, but these are the type of games you got to win if you want to go to the playoffs. And Ole Miss, now they have their second loss. They're 5-2. They dropped down to 18.
Yeah.
When you see that, it's going to be hard for Ole Miss to rebound. You have to win out and hope things fall your way. Because there's going to be a 10-2 team that misses out, 100%. So if you're 10-2 and don't have the wins, you can't be the team that, I lost to number 1 Texas and number 6 Alabama and get in. You got to have the wins to get in and not just the good losses. But yeah, I'm 100% on, there's going to be a 10-2 team left out. And Ole Miss is on the brink right now.
And like I said, their easy schedule kind of continues, and then they host Georgia towards the end of the year. So, like you said, they might end up, if they end up winning against Georgia, that's a 10-2 team. But like you said, that second loss is to Kentucky. So that's not even a big win, but it's just a bad loss.
Yeah,
Bad
and then
loss to them,
Yeah, and speaking about bad losses, Alabama just came off the Vanderbilt loss, and I would have put money on it. I didn't, thankfully, but I would have put money on just Alabama coming out, blowing the doors off South Carolina, because that's how it would have been with Nick Saban. It's hard to remember that Nick Saban's not there anymore. This isn't the same Alabama team, and I think that's really showing with the last couple showings. They come out, they out talent us South Carolina by a million. And you look at this game, South Carolina gained them on passing yards and rushing yards, had more first downs, led the time of possession, less penalty yards. The only thing South Carolina didn't win was the turnover battle. That's what ultimately did South Carolina in for their upset bid. But I mean, just looking at Alabama, it's just not. It's not your. It's not your daddy's Alabama. It's not last year's Alabama. I think they're really. This is showing, how much Saban had to do with their success and how hard it is to win consistently like he did.
And you take the second half of the Georgia game, their loss against Vanderbilt, and then even this squeak by win against South Carolina. This is an Alabama team that is very undisciplined. A lot of penalty yards, a lot of stupid mistakes, a lot of like personal fouls, and like those are things you did not see under the Saban era. And if you did, they did not see the field for a good amount of time. And I think that's a huge thing to that's like the big difference maker is just the culture of them just being kind of undisciplined and thinking that they have the most talent because, like I said, they're a talented roster all the way up and through that entire roster, both offense and defense. And like you said, this game should not have been close. The last two games should not have been games at all. And like I said, you're just undisciplined. You're not ready. You're not focused, and then you get hit by a train, and it's recoup time. And like you said, if they didn't have like maybe one of those scores in the first half of the Georgia game, they could have lost that game too. So it's very, you know, that team is very concerning. It's a very high-low team. Like I said, I just think it's just, they're not disciplined at all.
Yeah, and then I mean, you look at they lost to Vanderbilt. Very good position for Vanderbilt to come out and lay an egg, and they come out and beat Kentucky. We know Kentucky is that mystery team. They come out, beat Ole Miss, and then lose to Vandy, South Carolina. Like, I don't know what to make of Kentucky. I think a lot of it comes down to quarterback play, like it does with most college football. Whoever has the better quarterback wins most of the time. I know it was a really bad look. Mark Stoops in his post-game press conference was kind of complaining about NIL. And you lost to Vanderbilt. The NIL's not there for Vanderbilt for football. If you're below Vanderbilt for NIL in football, you got big problems. There's no you're not going to compete. Vanderbilt found a quarterback that can make plays. So I mean that's what Vanderbilt's riding right now, and it's working. And as long as that quarterback can make plays, they're going to be a very tough out in the SEC. It's not the walkover Vanderbilt team now with Clark Lay there leading the way for them, and it's all about having a quarterback in college football.
Yeah, and Kentucky is just one of those teams that I feel like they like to play spoiler. Like they play their best football against teams they have no business giving the business to. Georgia's and Ole Miss and all them. And then, like you said, like South Carolina came in and just wiped the floor with them. But then, like I said, they'll play Georgia and all the bigger schools really tough, and it's really hard. Just SEC football, but yeah, they just like to play spoiler a lot, I think, and just they have their game circled that they want to come and play football.
Yeah, and then looking at another game, Oklahoma's hoping to play spoiler this week, and just got the doors blown off. Just never was a game. They were winning 3-0 after the first quarter, but Texas scored the next 34 and never really looked back. I mean, Quinn Ewers kind of showed some of his rust from being off for a few weeks with that oblique injury, but they were still pretty dominant, winning by 31 points over an Oklahoma team that is beat up.
Say, did Jackson Arnold hurt or did they bench him?
I'm pretty sure at this point it's a benching. They're going with the freshman Hawkins. But the problem is, he's got nobody to throw to. All their top guys are hurt. All their top pass catchers are hurt right now. They just came in and, like I said, Texas has all the personnel advantages right now because of health. And even if it was a healthy Oklahoma team, Texas is number one for a reason right now. They're kind of the only team in the country that hasn't given you a reason to not vote them number one. I mean, Oregon's
Yeah.
looking at number two right now. Oregon had the slow start to the season with Idaho and Boise State. Texas has given you zero doubt. Every game they've they've played the way they wanted to play, did it the way they wanted to do. I mean, Texas is kind of the undisputed number one for me, without a doubt. The only other game here, we're not going to touch on Missouri and UMass, non-conference game. Just weird going to UMass, but Missouri took care of business, 45-3. The only other game on the schedule is Georgia and Mississippi State, where it's another one kind of like Alabama. Like, when is Georgia still Georgia? Where's this dominant team? Because Mississippi State was 1-4 coming in and had shown no real signs of life. And, you know, Mississippi State made this a game for most of it. Like, never really got too out of hand. If you're box scoring it, Georgia dominated, but the scoreboard says something different.
Yeah, and it's surprising to see with Kirby Smart that I think a lot of the holes are on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you play this game 2-3 years ago, Mississippi State doesn't score a touchdown, two touchdowns, but they put up 31 points, and I it may just be people are finally kind of figuring out what Kirby likes to do on what certain situations. Alabama right now we just have a really hard time containing the boundary, and we let in big plays on the secondary. So I think a lot of it is like huge success comes from the defensive line. And, we have the talent there with Stackhouse and Mikael Williams, but they're not getting it done. Like I said, they're great at stuffing the run and in between the tackles, but that outside boundary, they're just getting beat sideline to sideline. And then, every game this year, there's been at least a handful of like 30, 40-yard passes that, it's a blown coverage or they just get beat. So it is surprising to see that it's the defensive side of the ball now that's kind of struggling. I mean, we put up 41 points, so you said the stats look good on the offensive side. So, like you said, Kirby's just going to have to kind of nail down that defensive side of the ball, especially with Texas coming in this week. Or we actually have to travel to Texas this week.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at what Mississippi State's done this season, they lost to Arizona State, scored 23. They lost to Toledo at home and scored 17. Lost to Florida at home, scored 28. Lost at Texas, scored 13, but put 31 up on Georgia at Georgia. So, just super surprising, kind of the end score. Because, like you said, if you look at the stats, I mean, nothing like blows you away that this would have been close. Georgia had 600 yards compared to Mississippi State's 380. And then passing yards was 459 for Georgia. And then Mississippi State was held down to 79 yards rushing. So if you're really looking at it, Carson Beck's kind of getting kind of turnover prone. It kind of seems he's throwing more picks than you'd like to see for sure. So I think that's kind of really the only concerning part on offense, because the offense is putting up the points and the yards, but Beck is turning the ball over more than he's accustomed to, I feel like.
For sure, it doesn't help. That's for sure. But I mean, when your team puts up 30, 40 points a game, that defense has to stop them. You gotta have those defensive stops. And like I said, we could have been one or two defensive stops away from beating Alabama, in Tuscaloosa. But like I said, they just got absolutely torched that first quarter. And a lot of it was quarterback runs outside, little bubble screens outside. And I seen it last year against South Carolina. They were doing a bunch of just wide receiver screens, bubble screens, playing the perimeter, and Georgia has a hard time stopping the outside boundaries.
Yeah, yeah. That's it for the SEC. If we move over to the Big Ten, one of the big surprising games, there was a couple surprising games, but one of them is just how Wisconsin handled Rutgers. Rutgers, kind of had high hopes coming into this game. They're hosting the game. Wisconsin's on its backup quarterback. Rutgers really had a chance to, go 10-2, 9-3 with a win this game. And Wisconsin just comes in, blows the doors off 42-7. Rutgers never stood a chance in this game and never really got into what they had been doing to win those games. And now they, both teams are sitting at 4-2 and kind of on different trajectories. Wisconsin's trending up with this backup quarterback, and Rutgers is trending back down to, same old Rutgers, which is kind of, like I said, it's kind of disappointing because, they had looked good for, the first 5 games.
Yeah, and I actually, I had Wisconsin winning this week, which is kind of an underdog looking at how they played before and how Rutgers have been playing. But yeah, Rutgers just runs that offense that, if you can figure it out and stop it, they don't they can't adapt. They don't evolve. They rely a lot on the run game and the RPO type for the passing game, and it's just, if it's not there, it's just a really gritty game, and it's struggling. And you see it on the scoreboard when you can only put up one touchdown, and you're 4-1 going into this game. So it tells me that, like you said, if you can stop them on defense, that you have a good chance of winning. Just one of those offenses, if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, it's bad.
Yeah, and let's moving on to the next game. Talk about an offense that when it's good, it's good. It's bad, it's bad. Iowa came out and just blew out Washington, which I didn't have on my bingo card this week. Washington looked really good against Michigan last week. So, I don't know what that says about Michigan at this point, but they had a bye week, so we'll leave them alone. But I had, high hopes for Washington. You looked at that schedule for Washington coming up. If they got past Iowa, they were a possibility for sneaking into the playoff, even, losing earlier in the year. But yeah, just Iowa just come out and, put the grips on, and, really it wasn't much of a, it was never really much of a game. Will Rogers never really got going. And then if you look at, McNamara, he only had 108 yards passing.
Yeah, yeah,
Iowa did all of its damage on the ground, like they like to do. And they really fed off, the 2 turnovers Washington had. And I feel like this game should have been closer than what it appears, but Iowa comes out looking great, 40-16.
yeah, and fortunately, like I said, I had Iowa this week. But Caleb Johnson definitely carried that offense all game, or all day on Saturday. And Iowa at home is a tough place to play. They definitely bring the environment, and the crowd's always a factor there. And they won the turnover battle. Obviously Iowa's always known for their defense and not much for their offense, but when it clicks, it clicks. So you gotta take wins when you can get them.
Yeah, and it plays into the stat that's going around that in the Big Ten, if you're traveling 2 time zones either way, you're not coming out with the win many of the time. So, it plays a big factor too with Washington traveling across the country. But on the flip side of that, Minnesota went over to UCLA and snuck out a gritty win there. They won 21-17. This game was not for people that liked offense. It was a grinded out, boring game, if we're going to be honest. Because if you look, Minnesota had 234 total yards. UCLA had 329 total yards. UCLA had 3 interceptions and still was in this game at the end. If you're looking at Minnesota, they're just kind of that team that's grinding out wins. Already have 3 losses though on the season, but they're a super roller coaster team. You just beat USC, who still looked good this week and has looked good, but just can't close out a game. But you come off that victory of USC, go to UCLA, who is regarded, bottom 2 teams in the Big Ten, and struggle, coming out with 21-17 win. But If you really want to you want to jump your way up in the Big Ten echelon, 21-17 against UCLA is not really the way to do it.
Look at that game, and UCLA has no business being close, and that's just kind of a hit on Minnesota's, how bad Minnesota offense is. When UCLA had 3 turnovers, over 100 plus yards and penalty yards, 6 and 13 on third down, like those are not stats to be competitive, and yet you're only down by 4. So yeah, Minnesota's offense is just that bad.
Yeah, they struggle. Two teams that didn't struggle on offense this week was Illinois and Purdue. I mean, for what it was, 22 ranked Illinois at home, hosting Purdue, who is in that same category as UCLA for who's going to be the worst team in the Big Ten this year. And Purdue, it's rivalry game, so we know, that helps with competitiveness. And Purdue showed up for kind of the first time this year and really put a scare into Illinois. The game finished 50-49 in overtime. Another overtime game. We had a lot of those this week, which was rare. But both teams were over 500 yards of offense, and then what's really crazy, there's only one turnover, but it was just a crazy game back and forth. And luckily for Illinois, they came out with the win, so they'll continue to be ranked. And it was just one of those Big Ten games where Purdue shows up and puts a scare in somebody.
And there's usually when you have this many rushing yards between both teams, usually it's a low scoring game because it's running out the clock, but that is not the case. We had Illinois had 177 yards on the ground, and Purdue had 239. So that's just a crap ton of rushing yards, and for them to both put up over 40 points each is just unheard of, especially in the Big Ten. It's usually gritty, about wins, and usually don't get too many shootouts in the Big Ten, especially on a rushing attack type game. So it was definitely interesting, especially Illinois. Usually they're pretty sound on defense, more pass defense than rush defense, but again, that their quarterback Luke Altmaier, he's to me one of the better quarterbacks in the nation, let alone in the Big Ten. And I think he's very underrated as a quarterback. He went 20 for 34 with 379 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I think he's just a quarterback that kind of flies under the radar for that Illinois team.
Yeah, and then I mean, looking at the crazy stat is Purdue averaged 9.2 yards per play, so almost a first down per play Purdue was averaging, and still lost. It'll come down.
Yeah.
It came down to Purdue went for the win on the road, went for the 2-point conversion and didn't get it. But I know we talk about Sam Pittman always fighting for his job. The Big Ten side of that right now is Ryan Walters. Like, he is pretty much the only coach right now on the hot seat in the Big Ten. And I don't know how much this helps him because it was still a loss. But he's on the hot seat. He took over offensive call playing this week. And obviously something worked because they went off for 49 points. Looking at another game here, we pretty much just have the two good games, the two top games left in the Big Ten. Kind of a small slate. They only had 6 games. Let's start with the Oregon-Ohio State game, which was, a thriller that went, to the last second. Will Howard kind of makes a boneheaded play there at the end, doesn't get down in time to save the 1 second for the field goal. So kind of some unawareness there. I know there's some stuff out there on Twitter about how Dan Lanning purposely put the 12th man on the field. I don't know if you've seen this. To purposely,
Yep.
Well, if I have 12 people out there, it's going to be harder for them to gain anything. And the play is going to take so many seconds. Worst case scenario, they get 5 yards and they only have, 5-6 seconds left. If he truly did it on purpose, like Dan Lanning's going up another level on the coaching, it's a brilliant move if it was actually on purpose.
For sure. And I feel like it 100% was on purpose, coming right out of a timeout. You don't just have an extra guy on the field right out of a timeout. And then a lot of people were talking about that onside kick that they did. thinking that they were just trying to do a squib kick. And like, I think that was right out of the Waterboy playbook of, where's my guy? And I'm going to nail him
Yep.
with the ball. It worked out in their favor. Like you said, if, either of those two calls ended up going, to hurt them, then we'd be saying, Dan Lanning ain't, he's not as good of coach as we might think. But since they do go their way, then, it gets on the, intellectual level of being up there in strategy and like playing the rules in your favor, especially with the 12-man thing. So overall, I mean, that's the game that we want, for a ranked 2 and 3 team, 1 point game coming down to the wire. You couldn't really ask for anything better than that.
Yeah, and I mean there is a trend starting with Ohio State. I mean, you can't ignore it, even know how good they are. The last few times they've gone against top teams in the Michigan last couple of years. Missouri in the bowl game, even though it's a bowl game. I don't like counting bowl games because there's so much that goes into it if you didn't make the playoff. But you look at Oregon now and the Michigan from the last couple of years, Ryan Day doesn't really have a ton of high-profile wins when you look at his record. I mean, of course he's beating everybody he's supposed to beat, but when it comes down to, hey, you need to beat Michigan to make it into the playoffs. Hey, Oregon, you got Oregon on the schedule this year, and it's competitive, but in the end of the day, it's still a loss. So, I mean, there's definitely a trend here going with Ohio State under Ryan Day now to where there's going to be a narrative of, hey, at some point you're going to have to win one of these games before, we really start taking you serious again.
Absolutely, and I mean, he has an opportunity to kind of bounce back and get those key wins. They host Nebraska, I think, in 2 weeks. I think they're off this week after traveling out west. So they host Nebraska, and then they have to go to Happy Valley. To me, that'd be kind of a must-win for Ryan Day there in Happy Valley, but I don't think that's going to be a gimme game. James Franklin is trying to get over his own curve of winning big games. Traveling to USC, like you said, coast to coast traveling has not been good for the Big Ten. Like I said, they were like 2-10 for teams that had to travel coast to coast. And then right before the Michigan game, they go against Indiana. Luckily, it's at home for Ohio State, but again, if that Ohio State team comes in there unprepared, looking ahead to Michigan, Indiana could shock them.
Yeah, and I mean, we always criticize out of conference schedules if they're super weak. If you look, I mean, 10-2, if Ohio State doesn't go to Penn State and win, if they lose at Penn State, they're looking at 10-2 with no marquee wins. Who would you beat? You didn't beat anybody. You lost your top two games. This isn't last year's Michigan. Michigan still got Oregon on the schedule, so Michigan may not be ranked come end of the year. And then, they got Indiana, but Indiana's played one of the easiest schedules in the country. You put Indiana's schedule on probably 9 SEC teams in probably 8 or 9 Big Ten teams, and they're all going 6-0. Not taking anything away from Indiana. I'm on the Indiana bandwagon. I've been on it multiple times. Like, I've been on it all year. I feel like this season Indiana could go 10-2. Like, they caught the schedule breaks. They got the transfer portal in. They brought the right guys in on the transfer portal from James Madison. And Coach Spaghetti, he's a good coach, obviously. Like he said, Google him. All this guy does is win wherever he's been. So enough, not taking anything away from Indiana, but at some point they're going to start playing a little bit stiffer schedule as well. But yeah, I mean, looking at this game, it's everything you wanted from, like you said, from a top 3 matchup. Came down to the last second. It was back and forth all game. Neither team really got ahead by too much. One of the surprising things for me was Quinshon Judkins never really getting going. He had 11 carries for 23 yards. So that was part of the reason why he got brought in. was for games like this where, Ohio State doesn't have that quarterback that can take over the game. We always talk about quarterback. Will Howard's a good quarterback, but is he a quarterback that can go out there and win you the game? This is why they moved on from McCord, just because he couldn't go out and win you the game. And I don't know if Will Howard's that much different. I don't know if he can really go out there and win you a game. And then just the awareness at the end there. You can say what you want. He started the slide with 1 second left. You can't leave it in. You can't leave it down to the refs and timing. Because even if he did slide, like, the clock's running, it wasn't a first down. The play still got to play out. But just the awareness there, like, you got to get down with at least 2 seconds left so you have a second to call the timeout. Like, you can't cut it that close when all you need is a field goal, and you were on the edge of field goal range as it was. Like, just that kind of awareness there where, hey, if it's not there, like, we just have to have a chance to either Hail Mary or kick a long field goal. You can't go out just with clock running out.
For sure. And like you said, it's always up to skepticism of, there's a second left or whatever. But like you said, you gotta not put yourself in that position. Keep the game in your hands. You have control to an extent. And like you said, you gotta have that awareness of, where you are on the field and every aspect that could happen. That's got to be in the back of your mind, and it just didn't happen for him. And like you said, it might hurt him in the long run.
And then we'll finish our review show here with, Penn State USC, which for me was the best game of the week. James Franklin and Penn State head to USC, make the travel that everybody's talked about, come out and lay an egg in the first half, basically. Can't really say much more. Defense was getting torched on the ground with big plays. Offense was moving the ball, but not putting up touchdowns, settling for field goals. They go into half down 20-6. And then, for the first time in a long time, kind of back against the wall, Penn State came out and made the comeback. Like, Penn State isn't that team under James Franklin or really anybody. We've had James Franklin, Bill O'Brien, Joe Paterno. That's the list of coaches, basically. And Penn State doesn't win this game, basically. In my lifetime, they haven't won more than a handful of games like this, where they're on the road, they're the higher ranked team, they get punched in the mouth. Usually they lose that game. But this year, Drew Aller, even with his 3 interceptions, like, he showed what kind of quarterback he can be and what he could do for this team. It's the first time, skill-wise, he might be the best quarterback that Penn State's ever had, skill-wise. Whether it translates to wins and that type of stuff is for a future discussion. But you just look at this team, that's super creative. And we've got to talk about Tyler Warren. If you're talking about this game, you have to talk about the tight end, Tyler Warren. Every facet of offense he was involved in. He threw a pass for 9 yards. He had the run on 3rd and short for 4 yards to convert. And then 17 receptions for 224 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown, he was actually the center on the play. Like, he was the guy that snapped the ball on his touchdown. Tyler Warren needs serious, Heisman consideration at this point. Because just of what he's doing, what numbers he's putting up, and how important he is to this team. If you look at the Heisman right now, you got the Boise State running back, and, I feel like a free-for-all after that, basically, because, Quinn Ewers would be up there, but he missed a bunch of time with injuries, because, usually the best quarterback on the best team gets that Heisman praise. But if you're looking, why not Tyler Warren as of right now, I think he definitely has to be on the short list.
He should be, and that's the unfortunate thing about the Heisman is it is very stat heavy versus actually being the most. To me, it should be the most, full player. And like you said, Penn State is spreading this guy everywhere to get him the ball, whether it's far outside, like you said, center, fullback, slot man. Anything and everywhere this guy's at. And like you said, what other guy in the nation can do that and be successful at it? This Penn State team and, USC, it's more again, Lincoln Riley's defense is always a subject of question of what you're going to get out of that team. They came out to LSU, and it seemed like they kind of had some things figured out, and they played really good defensive football. But then now, as the season progresses, they're in the thick of the Big Ten. You can see their defense is again the subject of their failures. Like you said, at halftime I thought this game was over. I didn't think Penn State had a chance at all. I thought that they, like you said, that coast to coast travels, like, oh, got them. This game's over. And then, back to it again. It's like, you know, for USC, you let in all those points unanswered, and then to lose in overtime, it was a killer. Yeah, Drew Alar had almost 400 yards passing. He's definitely the focal point of that offense. And I think that, like you said, that's kind of the difference maker between this year and previous years is, your Sean Clifford and, Trace McSorley. They were more read option run type guys, not being able to throw the ball for 400 yards, 450 yards, that type of quarterback play. Yeah, to me, it's just, yeah, USC's defense is very subjective. To just let in that many, to let in that many unanswered points is just crazy, especially at home.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to look at Lincoln Riley's offense too. Both two of the interceptions that Aller threw, USC got the ball inside of Penn State's 30, and USC walked out with 6 points, 2 field goals. And
Yeah.
if you were watching the game, like as soon as the ball got turned over, Lincoln Riley's offense went super conservative. Just like at the end of the fourth quarter, there was still like over a minute left, and they're one first down away from being in field goal range, and he starts running clock. I'm not sure what was in his head, basically. Like, I mean, a lot of this has to go on Lincoln Riley's offense as well. You get into overtime, and you know, there's USC fans calling for pass interference on 2 of the 3 plays. You're in the Big Ten. Big Ten doesn't call pass interference or holds. You better get used to it. Like the Big Ten will notoriously let you play. Because if you look at USC's offensive line, like Abdul Carter, DDS, Zane Durant got held on almost every other play, but it's not going to get called in the Big Ten. It's just not. So either are these pass interference calls. It does not get called unless it's blatantly obvious. If you have to slow it down into slow-mo to see the pass interference, it's not going to get called. It's kind of like USC's welcome to the Big Ten moments last few weeks with the officials. Like, this is what we've been dealing with. Welcome to the club. Like, you can't leave it down to the refs. And like I said, for USC, I mean, they already have 3 losses now. They're a 500 team right now, with losses to Michigan, who doesn't look super great, to Minnesota, who doesn't look great, and then this one, Penn State. I'll be the first to say it if nobody else. Penn State's overrated at 3. Like, Penn State's not the 3rd best team in the country right now. Could they be? Yes, if they keep improving week to week like the good teams do. But I wouldn't have Penn State number 3 right now. But that's where things have fallen. That's just how things are. And, I'm not going to be upset about being the 3rd ranked team in the country with, a big road win at USC, big road win at West Virginia, beat a ranked Illinois team at home. We definitely have a resume, but from just watching the games, I wouldn't put us as top 3 in the country, but this is still a huge win.
Absolutely. And, I was one of those people that I kind of agree that it was pass interference and that first throw in overtime. The third one was subjective. I like the no call on that one. But then again, don't leave the game in the ref's hands if you don't like it. You're up, you went into halftime 20-6 at home. No reason you should have lost that game. You shouldn't have been put in the position to be in overtime. And, I feel like with those type of teams like Lincoln Riley and them, like, they throw those balls and those routes to get those calls. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not drawing up a play to beat a certain coverage or anything like that. It's to get that pass interference call, gain 15 yards, whatever. That's why I don't like about it. That's why I like that it was a no call. And but like I said, just don't put yourself in that situation if you don't like the outcome.
Right, like you had the chance to be aggressive after both turnovers, and there was not even an inkling of trying to get a touchdown on those two drives, it seems. And then to end the end of the game just boggles my mind. If I was a USC fan, I'd be furious at the end of that end of regulation, just getting to midfield basically, and all right, we're gonna let clock run, essentially, and then they throw the interception, which allows a little bit of a return, and then Penn State to try a very sorry Hail Mary. But, USC had the timeouts, had the time, but Lincoln Riley was playing not to lose. He was not playing to win. And if you're going to be a good team, you cannot play not to lose. James Franklin's done it forever. He's played not to lose games. If it's a big game, Penn State gets ahead, super conservative, and they play not to lose. You got to have the killer instinct. You have to be aggressive at all times. And if I'm a USC fan, this is on Lincoln Riley not being aggressive enough at the end of the game. Go win the game. You essentially left it to a coin toss and a field goal is what you left the game. That's what you were relying on for the game at the end of the game there. You were not like, okay, maybe we'll get a first down here on 3rd and 10, and then we can kick a 50-yard field goal. That, the kicker missed a 40-something yard field goal in overtime. Like, you play to win the game, like Herm Edwards says, You can't play not to lose. If you're going to be high end, if you're going to win the college football playoff, you can't play not to lose.
And you've seen a lot of that as of recent. A lot of that getting up by a lot in the first half, and then just playing super conservative, trying to get the clock out. And it's just like these offenses these days, like you said, you can put up 3 scores, like nothing, within half a quarter. And then it's like it's all new, it's a whole new game. So you got to be aggressive.
On that note, we will end our Week 7 review show. I mean, we touched on every Big Ten and SEC game. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and review. And thanks for watching.
Next time.
Feel like my internet is